Hi, and welcome back to Books of the Book, where we're studying 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. John, you mentioned just before we went to the break that there were some interesting spiritual developments happening around the time and when Paul was working with them. Tell us a little bit more.
You're right. Before we get to the text of Thessalonians itself, we're setting the context of the background. And there was a religion in Thessalonica that was unique to that city. It had to do with a citizen some centuries before, and his name was Cabirus. And according to the tradition, here's the interesting part. Cabirus had a miraculous birth, and he was sort of the patron of the outcast. Okay. And the people who didn't feel comfortable in the city. And he was reputed to have miraculous powers. He could do miracles, and he was murdered by his own brothers, but buried with symbols of royalty.
Okay.
So here's the interesting thing. And the whole idea is they believed that from time to time he would come back from the dead. He'd quietly return to the city and he'd help out people who were in trouble. And they believed that one day he would come back in full kingly power and he would drive out the Romans and restore the common people to the position they had before, and everything would be great. It was kind of a pagan messianism.
It sounds a little familiar.
Yeah, I mean, that story is strikingly similar in many ways to the Jesus story. In fact, when they would worship Cabirus, they would do blood sacrifices, they would confess their sins, and even have baptism.
Wow.
You know, they talked about participating in the blood of Cabirus who died, for them. And all of this is going on in Thessalonica long before Paul gets there.
Okay.
You see? And missionaries sometimes talk about the footprints of God, that God was there before the missionary came, that he was already working, the Holy Spirit was working to create a context in which when the missionary comes, everything will connect. This seems to clearly have been happening in Thessalonica, but here's the twist. When the Romans came and became aware of this religion, they came along and said, Augustus is Cabirus, returned. In other words, the Roman emperor co-opted this faith. And you see, this faith was what sort of gave them hope and courage for the future. And now the Romans have come and stolen that hope, robbed the common people. Now, what do you suppose would happen if Cabirus actually showed up in the city? It would be revolutionary, you see. Paul comes and he tells the story. Now, to the Jews in the synagogue, he tells the story in the context of the Old Testament. But there were some Gentiles in the synagogue. When they pick up the message, they go running to their neighbors and say, Cabirus is back. He's alive, and he's working with power, and he sent messengers to us. This would have revolutionary power in the Gentile side of the city. Now, the Jews had their own reasons to struggle with it. But in the Gentile side of the city, an uproar is easy to understand. Because what had happened is the Romans had left a spiritual vacuum in the city. They had lost their faith. There was no hope, no future, no religion, no belief in God. And Paul comes along and says, Christ, Jesus Christ is what you've been looking for. And when they hear the message of Jesus, they say, this is what we've been looking for. This is what we have hoped for. Pastor John, you pastor in Southern California, and there's a lot of people there that don't particularly live their life with reference to God. Do you see any footprints of God in Southern California?
You know, I like what you said, John. It's like, you know, God always goes before us. He's always going ahead of us before we get there. And yet, in the situation where I live, and I know where everybody lives here in North America and probably all over the world, but there are such vacuums for the need of God's presence in their life. And we still look at hopelessness in this world. There are people who could be very, quote unquote, successful, but they have that vacuum of hope. You know, acceptance, being accepted. Forgiveness is huge. Forgiveness in people's lives. We still see segregation and racism. Huge vacuums that the gospel answers. The gospel brings to us and brings fulfillment and all this, fills that vacuum, if you will, of those holes in people's lives.
Is this why you think people today are so excited about stories?
You know, I think it's, when you look at stories in general, the greatest story I think that we all love is the story of a hero. You know, where there's a situation, evil is ruling or overcoming, and yet the hero comes and good prevails. And that story,
and he rides off into the sunset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and that story goes through so many different cultures in the world.
So you think that story is talking about a spiritual hunger that secular people don't even realize they have?
I do.
That the stories that they see in the theater and wherever are really little pieces of a much bigger story,
right,
that God has placed in their hearts.
Yeah.
And if we can help people connect those little stories with God's big story, that can make all the difference.
Yeah.
So I think you can see the Thessalonians were ready for the gospel when it came. But they were also ready for extreme interpretations of it. And that's what we see a people that just rejoiced when the gospel came to them. But they also got off on some fringe things. As we work our way through the text, we'll see that there are some real challenges in this church. Anyway, Paul comes to the city, and one thing we notice is that Paul often ends up in the marketplace. He certainly did that in Athens, he did that in Corinth and Ephesus. So he doesn't just preach in the synagogue, but he'll often open a shop downtown in the marketplace, and there he will talk to people. And sometimes he'll preach right there in the street. And that worked in ancient times because it was commonly done. We've been learning in just the last couple of decades about popular philosophers. It was a major thing happening in the first century. There's a number of names that scholars could bring up of people who talked about these things. And Paul then, when he goes and preaches in the market square, this is normal for them. There was preachers there every day bringing their stuff. And the idea of these popular philosophers was that life change is possible.
Yeah.
You know, they would talk to the people and I'd say, you know, the ideas that you have are a little bit messed up. You know, I've got the right way for you. Let me tell you how. And if you will apply your life to this, you can change. You can become a better person. And it was a popular message. And Paul coming along is kind of a little bit like the others. Now, Paul was different from the others in a couple of ways. You know, this idea of life change through speaking, through personal mentoring and so forth. Paul did all of that. But Paul did two other things. First of all, Paul didn't teach that you could change yourself. You know, physician, heal thyself. Right. That's a Greek saying. Paul didn't say that. No, physician, don't heal yourself. Let God heal you. Yeah. So Paul always pointed to God as the source of life change. And not only that, but Paul always formed a community. He was not just going through town, take a little money, then go on to the next town. Okay. The popular philosophers went from town to town, mainly for their own gain, to make money. But Paul was doing it to raise up communities. And so he takes the work of the popular philosophers and twists it a little bit. Now, there was a dark side to these philosophers. It's very important for Paul. And that is, it was way better than working for a living. You see, most people back then had to do hard labor to work for a living. And a lot of people just thought, hey, if I can just go around, come up with a few good ideas and sell it on the street, you know, I'm good. You see, and I don't even have to work hard for a living. So I can make money and have an easy life. So popular philosophers, by the time Paul showed up, were not too popular anymore. And that's why I think you see Paul in place after place emphasizing, I didn't take your bread. I didn't take your money. I worked with my own hands to support myself. So Paul wanted to be clear. He was not in this for money. He was not in this for an easy life. And those were messages that had to be given in Thessalonica, or people would get a completely wrong concept of the gospel. So there were people who were preaching for selfish motives.
You know, it brings back to me, John, I remember a while back when there was quite a bit of fallout with TV evangelists. You know, their character was always in question as far as, you know, sexual incidents or taking advantage of people to make money and so forth. And I would travel And, you get on the plane and you always have that conversation, what do you do for a living? What do you do for a living? And I would regularly, when I tell them I'm a minister, they would go, oh. And then they immediately question my character and what my motives are. And, do I really love God and love people? Or am I out to manipulate and so forth? But, we constantly have to check our own motivations. It's the enemy is always trying to distract us and to tempt us and get us with selfish motivations. And I think it's important for us to put in place things that will keep us in the right way, accountability and so forth. I personally, I have some men at the church that I meet with regularly, and they have full permission to ask me any question they want about my life, my spiritual walk with God, my family, my ministry. I mean, they live with me in community, in a sense, at the church, and so I'm open to anything. And I think that we constantly have to put ourselves in those types of situations, constantly in the Word and in prayer, but we need the community as well, like Paul had. They could see that what he said was really the way he lived. And that's so important for us.
So you put your ministry to the test. You let other people challenge you and make sure that your motives are straight.
That's my intention.
Wow.
Iron sharpens iron.
Appreciate that. Yeah. That's impressive. Yeah. Let me share one more thing. And that is, in the ancient world, there's really no evidence for churches until around 250 AD. So for a time Paul is writing, the next couple hundred years, you don't have church buildings.
Yeah.
You see? People generally met in homes, and there were two types of homes in the ancient Greek cities. One was called the domus, and that's kind of like a mansion. That would be like a square building with a big central courtyard, and there would be a family, the whole extended family would live, like 50 people. They might have slaves and servants, and other people would come and just live with them who were single and stuff like that. So those kind of homes would have a fairly large church. You get 50 to 100 members of that house church.
Wow.
The other type is the insula, and that's like an apartment house. People would have little apartments, and sometimes the church would be in an insula apartment. That would be much smaller. It might be only 15, 20, 25 people. So churches back then were not big things with buildings like we think of it today. They were communities of a family size, you see? And so when you think of church in Paul's day, you're really thinking family.
Yeah. Community is so important, and it's important to meet people where they're at, as we can see.
Yeah.
And so, John, I've really enjoyed what you've said today. All this context is great, and understanding where we're going to begin next time as we start right there with chapter 1 of 1 Thessalonians. And so it's important for us to meet people where they're at, really try to understand before being understood.
Because that's what God does.
Right, exactly.
God's calling us to do that.
Understand the context of the person's life, and then speak to it. And so we've enjoyed this time together with the audience and looking at all this context for 1 and 2 Thessalonians. And we hope that you will join us again as we begin chapter 1 next time. God bless you.